Welcome to the Nirvah podcast. And on our first episode, we have Dr. Amanda Kiessel, one of the co-founders of Good Market. So, Dr. Kiessel, could you tell us a bit about your journey leading up to the founding of Good Market in terms of what inspired you to focus on creating a more sustainable and inclusive food system?
Yeah, I might have to step back for a second. Judge, it's great to be with you. I might actually have to step back a second because the actual big story behind Good Market was more about shifting the economic system. The food system part was actually something that I'd been working on before. So would you like to hear that part of the story first?
Of course, yeah.
Okay,
Step back as far as
sure.
you want.
Okay. Yeah, so I spent about 20 years in Sri Lanka. That's been home base, and I was working with a local organization. So there's three co-founders. We were all working with the same local organization, and it was working in a lot of areas affected by the war. And the way that we kind of kept energy up during that time, because we were all interested in kind of the long-term, like self-sustaining models, fair trade, organic, all of these things, is we would go and visit groups that were doing that kind of work, right? So it would be, if you're going to take a little bit of time, you'd go see friends in Thailand or in Japan or in different places that were doing work with a self-sustaining model, right? And so doing that, one of the things that became really clear is that we just have this incredible movement coming up. We weren't using the word social enterprise at the time, but basically, if you think our current economic system is about putting profit first over everything else, you just have this incredible movement of people and organizations that are choosing to put people and planet first. Right? So the whole big backstory was wanting to make it easier for everyone that's doing that, everyone in this movement, to be able to find and connect with each other, right? So that's the backstory on Good Market, of wanting to make it easier to find and connect, particularly because it's been bottom up and it's really fragmented, right? You have people maybe in the same sector that know each other, or maybe it's each other by how you're registered, or it's by your language. If you're in Thailand, maybe you only know the groups that are speaking Thai, right? So the idea was, how can we make it so that we can find and connect with each other across sectors, across certifications, across languages, all of those kinds of things, to be able to speed up the movement. So that was kind of the backstory of how it all came to be. It was talking to friends in Sri Lanka and in other countries about, hey, we really need to make this movement more visible, and we need to make it easier to connect. That's the backstory.
Right. That's very interesting. And what was your reasoning behind wanting to do this? Was there anything that happened in your life growing up, or anything significant that occurred which acted as your why to push through all of the difficult times that I'm sure came up as you were building this
Yeah.
company?
Yeah, I think it's been a series of whys, right? I think I started out deep concern about ecological systems, right? So that was kind of an entry point, being very, very worried about what was happening with the planet. Ended up focusing on agroecology and sustainable food systems specifically, right? So that's something we definitely have a lot to talk about in future. And then as time was going on, so I was in Sri Lanka and got very involved in thinking about, well, how do social systems work? How does change happen in social systems? How do ideas spread? How do people connect? How do people, there's this amazing history of managing natural resources like the Vava, the tanks, right? Or how do people get together in a community and come up, share resources, or the funeral aid societies, all that. So it was like ecological systems, and then deep understanding, how do social systems work? How do people get together and make change? And as time goes on, you realize you just can't leave out economic systems. Like, the root cause of so many of the challenges that we're facing are rules that we humans came up with about how the economy needs to work that aren't serving us. So I think that was it. It was it kind of got deeper and deeper into the layers of these systems, and it's like, oh, we can't ignore this. So by the time Good Market was starting, it was building on all of these other things, but it was very much like, how can we reimagine how we work together as humans. How can we reimagine our economic system? That's kind of the backstory.
That's amazing. So, and yeah, I can relate to that a lot. There are so many issues with the economic system, and depending on the country you're in, I mean, Sri Lanka right now is going through one of the biggest crises in its history. So
Yeah.
it wasn't at a good point to start with, but now it's actually at a much worse level, and the recovery is going to be an interesting thing to see. It definitely needs to be done, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think there's also a really important point to remember there is that if you take the majority of the people on the planet, no matter what country they're in, this system isn't working very well for them.
right.
And it's particularly true in countries that have dealt with structural adjustment, post-colonial things, all of that. And there's a lot of shared experiences, right? And I feel like only now we're starting to actually talk across all of those lines and be like, oh yeah, we're having the same challenge in our country, and to be able to share those countries. So I think it's kind of less about, a recovery in the sense of going back. It's more like it's time to shift and change things going forward to actually have a transformation. Right. This can't happen again. Right. And
Right.
it has to do with a lot of issues outside of Sri Lanka. And I think the only way we're going to solve those is by talking to other countries that are having those same challenges.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I think that's a very interesting way to look at it, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done
Yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
solving all of
Yeah.
these problems. But we'll see what we can do, one problem at a time. Um,
Yep. Yep.
but
Exactly.
yeah, so when it comes to good market, could you tell us how it works and how it connects ethical producers and consumers?
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened is we've been having these discussions, friends in Sri Lanka, friends in other parts of the world about wanting to have something with software where we could connect. But we'd been experiencing what was happening with aid in Sri Lanka during the tsunami and during the war. And we'd just seen a lot of software platforms or different projects where if it was donor funded, it's like while the funding was there, everything looks amazing. And then when the funding's gone, everything stops, right? And there were a lot of ghost platforms, things that were built with donor funds that never actually had a community around it. So it's like this big plan, but we didn't want to start with software. It needed to be kind of more of a lean startup approach, right? You have to have, does the concept work? And does this make sense? And, and build community around it. So that, I think you probably know about all the good market activities in Sri Lanka, I hope.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. And so when the event first started, part of it was to test the concept, right? So the idea with the future software is that it's curated. It means that everybody meets minimum standards, right? They're all trying to prioritize people and planet. And it's community owned standards, and there's a crowdsourced monitoring system. So this was like the original concept, but we didn't know if it was going to work, right? And so part of it too is we were seeing, there were a lot of groups we knew that had third-party certification for export, and that's fantastic. That's necessary for certain supply chains. But that's the tip of the iceberg. Like if you take the people that are doing good work, if you take all the organizations trying to, like farmer, producer groups, everything in Sri Lanka, there are a lot of groups that didn't have third-party certification. So the idea with this is like, okay, great. If someone has it, let's recognize them. But if they don't, let's have a free, lightweight process where we can say, yes, they're part of this movement. They're putting people and planet first. So the idea with the event was to test, does this work? Does this curation process work? Is anyone interested, right? Is there a there, basically? And we thought it'd be really small. We thought it'd be like, 10 stalls or something like that. And we just kind of see if it worked. And what happened is it quickly became popular. And at this point, I mean, we kind of thought we knew a lot of the groups doing this work in the country, right? Because we've been doing this for many, many years already and had really strong relationships with people. And all of a sudden, new people started applying, and they were doing all sorts of things we didn't even know were happening, you know? And so what ended up happening is it got to the point. I mean, we quickly went up to, we had, you know, like we were up at like 150 stalls, which was not expected. And we realized that there were people that this was kind of now their livelihoods were starting to be dependent on it. There were a lot of farmers who had been growing organically because they felt it was the right thing to do. And this was the first time they'd had access to customers that actually wanted that, right? So they were having relationships and all of that. For the groups that were doing things with like housewares and clothing and all of that, there were retailers we could link them up with. But for the farmers, they weren't ready yet. They were just bringing what they harvested, right? They weren't planning for orders. They weren't at that level of consistency. Like at this point, supermarkets that we had been talking to for years, trying to get organic products into supermarkets, and they'd said, no, there's no demand in Sri Lanka. Now they're coming to us, but the farmers aren't ready to do like consistent orders and supply and all of that, right? So we realized, you know, we can't actually stop the event, right?
Yes.
And so we ended up telling all the international groups that we'd been talking to about the software. We ended up telling them, we're going to have to wait because this has to be self-sustaining. This has to keep going, right? And it took 5 years. So before it was at the point where everything was just kind of ongoing and we were able to start the software. And it's so fortunate that we did it that way, because the ideas we had for the software, by the time we were ready to actually start building it, we realized they would have been wrong. You know, at this point now we have like a whole community of people and we know what everyone's asking for. And we'd been testing. We had weekly meetings to do the application review. So it was like paper applications, 3 languages, weekly meetings for 4 years. So by the time we were ready to build software, we knew, right? Like what worked, what didn't, how it needed to be. But it is definitely not the fastest way to do something. So that's the backstory. And so it's really fun now because, you know, the event and the shops and there's a whole network of organic farmers in Sri Lanka under a participatory guarantee system. We end up sharing that with people from other countries, right? So there's other places, if they don't have, say, government funding or donor funding to get a network together, this is a really great way to build the ecosystem in your local area, right? So we end up sharing what our experiences were, and we give like all the lessons learned and all of that, so that people can start this under their own names in other countries, and then they get on the Good Market platform under their own name. So that part has been incredibly fun. So it's still inspiring people, you know, in other countries as well, which is really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're in over 90 countries?
I think we have enterprises in 95 countries now. Yeah. Definitely in some of them very, very strong clusters. And in other ones, it's like, you know, people, it's a surprise that they sign up and then they invite others in their community. Yeah.
That's awesome. Did you see it getting up to that many countries at the start?
I mean, that was certainly like when we were doing the first, like what we wanted it to be, that was what we wanted it to be, right? And very much, you know, across all sectors, so that no matter where you are in the world, you can find, or if you're looking for a product or a service or somebody to work with, because that's the other thing that became really clear really quickly. If you're doing this kind of work, you want to work with others that have shared values, right? And so that means you need people with finance background and design background and software development, you know, you need people doing transport and logistics, and you need to have across all sectors to really build this up. So yeah, the idea, you know, the big crazy idea was, yes, across countries and across different sectors. Yeah.
Right. And that's very interesting. So you said services as well. And is that something?
Very much. Yeah.
So Good Market offers a series of services through the platform?
Yeah, so there are, what we're seeing is it's kind of like, if you think of it like an ecosystem, right? You end up, the first wave, I think in a lot of countries, are things that are customer facing, right? So it would be people doing food and beverage, it's clothing, housewares, it's tourism is a really common first wave thing. And then those enterprises have demand, for, well, I mean, I think some of the things you're working on are a good fit for that, right? There's demand for a B2B supply, and there's demand for business services and all of those things. And they need equipment, they need solar panels, they need all of those kinds of things. So you see kind of this, as an area starts to have more and more of these enterprises, this ecosystem develops of all different types of enterprises. So yes, absolutely. Services and networks is a huge part of it. So it's really designed to support, what they would call communities of place and communities of practice. So there's a lot of networks that use the site, and they get their own version of the site. They have, here's their directory, here's the marketplace, here's their community. And I think that's one of the things that I think has made it grow so quickly, is the networks are the ones kind of pulling their community in, which is really fun.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing because I've recently been trying to find a Vedamata. So that is like a native Sri Lankan doctor, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And it's been quite tough to find somebody who isn't as commercialized, because traditionally this field they didn't charge any money. People just gave whatever they can in terms of food, or they donated something maybe, but now it's quite commercial. But then from their point of view, they need money to live in a capitalistic world, which I guess makes sense. But it's tough to find some of these services, and it's cool that there's a platform that almost has an inbuilt certification where people can go and find these services.
Yeah, and I think another thing that was really helpful is, all the initial testing of the software. We started out, like, the first groups that were kind of filling the application form online, because it had always been paper. It would be people that maybe are urban, in Colombo, who have, are comfortable in English, comfortable in computers. And then you go to the group that maybe they're comfortable with Facebook only. And then you're working with people that they're not comfortable in English at all. Because we started out, the software had 3 languages to start. We've been adding more languages. We have a community translation project. And then by the time, when you know that it's really right, is when you have a lot of people who don't ever use computers. Maybe there's like a shared mobile phone and a smartphone in the family, or there's one that's used in the local area. And so it's been really fun. Like, if you're getting applications from traditional Ayurveda families, and it's in Sinhala, and it's from it's not from a central area, that's when you feel like, okay, this is working. That's when it's like, that's your test, right? That it's actually at a point where it's useful. It's really fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's something that we wanna get to at some point as well, once we've scaled a bit. And
that's actually a really good point for even, if you're thinking global scaling, right? Because I think there's often this assumption that things all start in Silicon Valley or places like that, but it would have been really hard to do something there and have it work for somebody who doesn't touch computers and doesn't speak English,
right.
Up north or in the hill country. And so this approach, if you get it working, like being able to get it working here, we're getting take up in, all parts of Asia and different parts of Africa and in Europe and North America and places like that. If it works for this community, it works for people in lots of different places. So that's been really fun. And I think that's a story that we need to be putting out more. Innovation can come from anywhere.
For sure. I think that the transition that way is possibly even easier than the transition the other way, I would think.
Yeah. It is. I might be going off track here, but I think it's relevant maybe for some of the stuff you're doing. But it is. But there is a bit of a barrier. We really struggled to take it from, people were seeing it as a Sri Lanka thing, right? And so getting across that kind of chasm, or getting across that boundary where they were accepting it as global, that was hard. because there is this assumption that, all these ideas come from London or come from Silicon Valley or whatever. Now it's okay. Now they know it comes from Sri Lanka. It's global. They recognize groups from their own country. It's fine. But crossing that was really hard. So it's easy on the tech side, but there is still kind of this social barrier where there's an assumption about, where software comes from that I think is really outdated and we need to change.
Right. And actually, the quality of software development in Sri Lanka is quite high. Your
It's
platform looks
incredibly high.
amazing. It is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people don't really know. I guess Sri Lanka gets overshadowed by India, which has a huge tech scene. And
Yeah.
we don't have the numbers, and we'll probably never will have the numbers of India because they just have so many more people. But there's a solid group of people, smart people who can build tech at a very high level here in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have people that, really specialize in cutting edge things. It is top level software skills. It's amazing. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So when it comes to your background in public health and environmental management, how does that intersect with Good Market, and what kind of a perspective do you bring to the challenges you've faced in the food supply chain?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a couple of things. I mean, one is, with what we're doing now with the software, certainly that informs. We get a lot of people signing up that are thinking about the social side, which is fantastic, but helping them see the connection, between social impact, personal health, environment, that it's all connected. I find with kind of younger social entrepreneurs or younger people in the space, they immediately get that. But sometimes with people that entered in a different way, that's a new concept for them. So helping people see that is definitely one of the things that we focus on. I'd say earlier, a lot of so all the work I was doing before Good Market started, and certainly before we started the software development, because when we were doing like just the marketplace and the events and all of that, it was very much with small scale farmer groups. That's been very much my focus, and I'm coming from a farming family myself, so that very much. I think influenced what pulled me. And I think it's a big part. I mean, when I came to Sri Lanka, I planned to be there for 8 months, and I spent 20 years. So the food and agriculture aspect and the community aspect was a huge part of what I was so excited about. And actually, if I think this might be relevant for some of the things you're working on, in the Sri Lankan context, there's still huge amounts of diversity. There's still a lot of biodiversity on each farm, which is so important for economic resilience, right? It means if like one crop doesn't make it, you still have other crops, right? It's good for food security and all of that. And it's certainly better from an ecological, environmental perspective, right? And there's this incredible history in all of the different agroecological regions of like really making the most of each environment. There's just like how the dry zone system works and how it works in the wet zone and all the forest gardens. I mean, it's incredible. Like people come from other countries to learn about traditional agriculture in Sri Lanka, right? It's incredible. And I think one of the things that I'm hoping this is also something you're also kind of looking at is where you end up with challenges with that. It's that kind of diversity is actually more productive per area of land, right? When you have a smaller scale farmer that has many different crops, it's actually more productive. They know the land well, right? It's diverse. It's good for all these different reasons, but there's an information challenge, right? Of what is it that you grow? How do you access markets? How do you access planting materials? How do you organize as a group to be able to aggregate all, like I have a little bit of banana and a little bit of this and a little bit of this, right? How do you get in a group and aggregate those things? And this is something that I think there's a big potential This is something that didn't get figured out in a lot of countries. Like where I grew up, everything just went monoculture, and now they're trying to recover these kinds of food systems. In Sri Lanka, there's the potential because there's this incredible farming background and there's an incredible software talent of being able to put those two things together so that we can have this kind of diversity, but we can solve the information challenge that comes with having this kind of diversity. So I think that's one of the things it's not the project I'm working on at the moment with Good Market, but I'm very excited to be seeing people kind of working and trying to figure this out, because I think it's really important, not just for Sri Lanka, but overall, I think this is really important.
Yeah, for sure. I think I feel like you're working on that too, though. Like you're giving a lot of these small scale producers access to a piece of tech that they can use to impact their lives. And I'm pretty sure this is something that you must have been able to see a change in their lives and maybe like their gratitude towards you, because Sri Lankan people, especially from the rural communities, when you help them out there, they're extremely thankful and grateful. So what has that been like for you to see that? And
Yeah, I mean, in this case, there's a sense, I mean, when we were starting, there's a whole network of volunteers that all pitched in together to build this, right? Like to get the events started and all of that. And there's also a sense that everybody owns it. The software itself is set up as a digital commons, right? Which has been so much fun because it means anytime a network kind of invests in new development, it benefits everybody, right? So there's kind of a sense, it's not me, it's like, it's this whole, network of people that have all built this together. But there's no question. I mean, I'm in the States right now, and there's definitely things I really miss, because if I'm there and I'm at the event, like you get like all the little side things from the garden, like somebody will give you, if it's like a time for a certain type of fruit or something they know you like, and but it's not like, it just feels connected. You know what I mean? It's that feeling of having relationships with people. And I think I'd say that's probably what we're trying to replicate in a way with the software, right? Is if you think about how we used to exchange and have markets in the past, they weren't transactional. It wasn't like I give you money, you get the thing, we're done, right? It was relationships. It was people you were going to see over and over. And if you're at the event, if you're at the Good Market events, that's how it feels. You see people, and they're going to save something for you for next week, and it's, you've got your special favorites and all of that. It's a relationship. And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do on the software as well, is like, by everyone knowing that they all meet the Good Market standards, you're starting out with kind of a level of trust, that there's other people who are like-minded. So if they're going to look for, say, an app to use, a software app, or they're looking for a service provider, they're looking for anything, there's kind of a sense that you kind of know each other. And then it's about, maintaining relationships over time, right? That part is just incredibly fun. So it's not so much like being grateful for, it's more like having relationships with, that's really, really special. Yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you look at the bigger picture, what's your vision for the future of the food supply chain, both in Sri Lanka and globally? And where do you see Good Market fitting in this picture? Good Market and other social enterprises.
Yeah. I mean, I think where we need to get to, right, is kind of relocalizing our supply chains and our food systems. And you can see that, I can feel that happening in Sri Lanka in a way that's really exciting. I feel like in the early days, everyone was looking for these imported products. They'd heard about a certain health food. They would come looking for apple cider vinegar, or they'd look for quinoa or something like that. And now they're excited when they find out about, like, coconut vinegar has actually more health benefits, and here are local grains that they think they can try and they can experiment with and do. Like, we have chefs doing all sorts of great things with local ingredients. They're, even if they want cheese, they're focused on getting it locally. So I think there's an element of kind of relocalizing our food systems it gives us way more resilience, especially in times of crisis, when wars pop up unexpectedly, or when we have pandemics or things like that. So that's a big piece of it. I think there's a big focus, big focus on increasing diversity. So, not being limited to Cavendish one variety of banana, right? But having all the different varieties of banana, that gives us more resilience. It also tastes better. It's so much more fun to have heirloom varieties and all of that. So I think those are kind of two big themes, is around diversity, around localizing. And I think the other thing is, is what I was talking about earlier about, putting people and planet first. It's about having a connection with everybody that's in your supply chain, right? That you know the farmers who grew your food, or where it came from, or you feel some kind of a relationship or a connection with them. It changes how you feel about food, right? It's just a completely different experience if you know where it came from and you know how it was grown. So those are some of the patterns that I'm kind of seeing in that. I feel like Sri Lanka has a real advantage when it comes to those areas, right? And can serve as an example maybe for other places as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome that people see it that way, because in Sri Lanka, people always try to import ideas. They're just trying to
I
bring
know.
something that's been set up, but there's so much good here in the country that we can improve and grow and also maybe export.
Yeah,
So
exactly. This is actually the one thing I really struggle with, right? Because so I'd lived in Thailand for a couple of years before I came to Sri Lanka. In Thailand, the attitude is they felt sorry for me that I was born in America. I must have done something wrong in a past life to end up there, because being Thai was the best thing ever. And then you get to Sri Lanka and people don't even know how amazing things are, right? There's a sense of, always looking to the outside for things without recognizing how many things there are to value that are there locally. There is one thing I'd like to say though, because Sri Lanka has had an economy that's so dependent on certain export products, and those products can't be grown in a lot of other countries, like tea and coconut and things like that. One of the things I'm really excited about is seeing all of the local brands that are now, selling directly under their brand, their whole story in international markets. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on kind of changing some of the trade laws and things like that. We're starting to get more groups with people in Good Market that are like, coordinating on some of these kinds of things about policy. But I think this part of, I just actually said this. I said this, that I mentioned I was at a conference recently, and I said, there's no such thing as English tea, Belgian chocolate, or Italian coffee. Those things don't exist, right? So it's a colonial artifact that we even talk about those things. So having those brands that are doing products for export, being able to have it under their own name and their own story and get the whole value chain back to Sri Lanka, I think that's another area that we need to be focusing on, because people aren't going to stop drinking tea or coffee anytime soon.
right, yeah, and that's amazing, especially Ceylon cinnamon, because that's the highest grade of cinnamon and it doesn't grow anywhere else. And a lot of these cinnamon farmers, they don't end up being able to profit as much through their hard work, because somebody else in the middle is always
Yeah.
profiting the most. And I feel like this is common across the entire farming culture, where distributors end up taking most of the profit. When it
Yeah.
comes to
And
this, what are your thoughts? And
it's particularly strong when you're talking about export markets, right? So that's an area that we want to see more of the value going to the producing country, and the story. People should know where it comes from, because often you'll see a jar of coconut oil, or you'll see some kind of cinnamon in a supermarket in Europe or North America, and it might say, and it's an organic product. And at this point, I know who is coming from. Like, I know all of the different groups. I know where it's coming from, but their story isn't anywhere to be found. It's all private label, white label. And that means the majority of the value isn't making it back to Sri Lanka. So so I think that's something that we need to be talking about, right? We've got a lot of talented people, with marketing backgrounds and things like that, that are working on this. There's some great brands coming up in Sri Lanka right now, and in other countries, where they're really, people that are producing chocolate at source, for example, and doing bean to bar and selling as a value-added product. We're seeing more and more of those things popping up. So it's a matter of raising awareness, getting people to talk about it. Yeah.
Right. And in terms of Sri Lanka, I guess, what role do you see the government playing in terms of improving these systems and fostering a more sustainable and inclusive food system in Sri Lanka and globally? Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, you want the government to play a supportive, enabling role, right? And I know it's hard to talk about right now with how many challenges there have been in recent years, right? But if we look historically, Sri Lanka has done a relatively good job of that compared to many other countries, right? A lot of decisions were taken in the past where they were thinking about, people and planet and all of these kinds of things. But what we're seeing as kind of a global trend is more and more influence from basically multinational corporations. And you see this happening in Sri Lanka as well. Watching the pattern of government employees that were getting, extra resources through agrochemical companies and how that was affecting certain policies and things. That's hard to see because you can watch the pattern over time, right? You see it change. So I think that's a big motivation behind what I refer to as like making the movement more visible and more connected. Is if we're going to be pushing for change, it's not going to happen automatically. It's from all of us who are doing this kind of work going and saying, these are the policies we need. We're on the ground. We know what the situation is. These are the policies that we need that would make it easier for us to do work. So I'm seeing things around like procurement, for example, giving priority to groups that put people and planet first, to social enterprises and groups like that in the procurement process. It's public money. It should go to groups that are, are prioritizing the public. So I'm seeing patterns like that coming up, but this isn't something that's just going to happen automatically. It's going to come from the people doing this work who know it on the ground, know which policies don't work, know which policies would work better, and then going and asking for it and saying, this is what we need. This is what would enable us to do more, right? These kinds of things, it's never led by government. It's always a push from the bottom, right? Always. And to me, the unfortunate thing is it doesn't just stop there, right? Even if you win certain things and you have certain rights, you have to keep working at it, right? Things change over time. It's kind of an ongoing process, but that comes from all of us who are trying to work in a better way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really cool way to look at it. There's a lot that we can do because right now in Sri Lanka, a lot has happened and there have been a lot of decisions that have been made by government officials that have caused it, and people are frustrated. So they're complaining, and rightfully so. But at some point, you need to take action and utilize your energy towards that, and that's something that we'd like to see for sure.
When it comes to thinking about how to shift things with the government and how to make it work better for all of us, I think sometimes it's helpful to remember there's lots of different ways of doing that, right? Sometimes you have groups that are, more activist mode and, out on the street and doing protests, and you have groups that are doing this kind of work to build enterprises and build a new way of doing things, or environmental organizations and all of that. And it's important to remember it's not either or. Both of those things, they support each other. We need both of them. It's a both, very much a both and situation. And I think sometimes when we recognize that, we can find better ways to collaborate in whatever it is that is a best fit for us, to work with people that are using different strategies to try and shift things. I think that ends up being an important thing if we're trying to make change.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, we need both. We need both of these things. And as we wrap up, is there any message or call to action you would like to share with our listeners, people who are doing the groundwork and people who can contribute towards making the most amount of change, about creating a more sustainable and equitable food system?
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, the most exciting thing about this is that everyone gets to be involved, right? And there are so many different entry points. You know, for some people, depending on where they are in their life or what's happening, it's just about being mindful about what you're eating, right? I think I've watched a lot of people even take that on as part of their personal spiritual practice of like, that's another form of mindfulness of thinking about where your food comes from and what the impacts are. So there's that aspect. But the best part is that there's just so many ways to get involved. Whatever your personal interests are, whatever it is that, you know, your skill set, whatever it is that you feel fired up about, there are opportunities to get involved. And sometimes it ends up being, you know, you have a kind of an entry point. Maybe you're volunteering or you're being thoughtful about your purchases or something like that. But over time, maybe you choose to do a different type of work, or you choose to change other practices, you expand this to other areas. But it comes down to both, you know, in your daily life and in your work, making choices that you're putting your values first, you're putting people and planet first, and the choices that you're making. So I think that would be the call to action. And the fact that we all get to do it together, right? It's about creating the world we want to live in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's really, really cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for this.